On today's episode, I'm bringing in two writers from TREW Marketing, and they're going to share how they're using AI chat technology like large language models in the writing process. And we've done episodes like this before a year or even more than a year ago. And so it was an interesting discussion and touch point to see how things have changed over this past year for the good, maybe for the bad. I don't know. You'll have to listen and find out. They also give very specific tips on not only where to use tools like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini, but also how to construct your prompts so that you get a better result. And along those lines, some pretty cool shortcuts related to threads. Let's do this.
Welcome to Content Marketing Engineered, your source for building trust and generating demand with technical content. Here is your host, Wendy Covey.
Hi, and welcome to Content Marketing Engineered. On each episode, I'll break down an industry trend, challenge, or best practice in reaching technical audiences. You'll meet colleagues, friends, and clients of mine who will stop by to share their stories. And I hope that you leave each episode feeling inspired and ready to take action. Before we jump in, I'd like to give a brief shout out to my agency, TREW Marketing. TREW is a full-service agency located in beautiful Austin, Texas, serving highly technical companies. For more information, visit trewmarketing.com. And now, on with our podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Content Marketing Engineered. I'm joined today by Jamie and Julia, two TREW crewers, and today we're going to have a fun talk about how we're using AI in our professional lives. Maybe we'll get into personal stuff. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But anyway, welcome back to the show, Jamie and Julia.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks for having
Happy
me.
to be here.
We were laughing right before we hit record because we're all wearing green today. We're channeling St. Patrick's Day or something, even though it's the middle of summer. That's okay. We're feeling it. So for the purpose of today's episode, we're going to focus on AI tools where you're creating prompts and you're chatting with the AI tool. We're not going to talk about things that are built, capabilities that are sort of running in the background, like say within HubSpot, for example. So just to kind of set that expectation before we jump into all of this. And I'm just going to start in. I have a lot of questions for you guys. So let's just start here. How is TREW Marketing integrated AI tools into our processes?
I'll go first, then Julia, if you want to talk about what you're working with. But a lot of what we're doing is we've tried over the past year and a half to 2 years experimenting with a lot of different tools and trying out a lot of different things. As we all know, AI is rapidly changing and the tools are rapidly changing. So really, most recently, some of the things that I've found most helpful are using AI tools for research and level setting and really kind of that initial work. In my role, I am primarily a writer. So really that initial work of gathering information, kind of learning about the topic, because a lot of what we're writing about with our audience is highly technical. So there's always kind of a lot of that background, that level setting that needs to be done.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I use it a little bit for research. I also do a lot of writing in my role, and I use it, a lot of times I use it to prep for sourcing sessions when I'm sitting down with a subject matter expert. So in TREW's content strategy, a lot of times we'll come up with different topics and we'll have, for example, I'm writing a blog, we'll have kind of a rough title for the blog and kind of some key bullet points of key points that we want to hit within the blog article. And I will share that with whatever AI tool I'm using. And I'll say, hey, I'm meeting with the subject matter expert about it. Help me come up with some sourcing questions to be able to get the full picture of this topic. I also find I use it a lot in kind of ideating once I have already talked with the subject matter expert. I will have it analyze my sourcing sessions. So I will upload either a video recording or a transcript, and I'll have it kind of summarize it for me. I'll use it to ask it questions as I'm kind of digesting all of the information. I'll have it help me create an outline. But and then editing later on, once I start my writing process, I'll have it help me tweak my headlines or tweak that one sentence that just doesn't sound right. I use it quite a bit.
I was going to say, I'm imagining this visual that shows the whole writing process from
Mhm.
ideation and research all the way through to the finished piece. And it sounds like you really do drop in AI to almost every step in some way.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a touch point in almost every piece of my writing process.
So Jamie, when you answer the question, you started by saying the past 18 months, maybe even 2 years, we've been experimenting. And so I'm curious, have there been any improvements or changes? I mean, I know there was a lot of that, what was it, where you'd have just made up information that would show up and really had to fact check. Have things gotten better? What have you seen over that time frame?
Yeah, so a two-part answer here. So number one, we in the experimental period, we've tried a lot of tools. And something we did during that time was we've tried some tools that were geared towards the actual content generation versus so tools that were designed to do that, provide like AI generated content. And what we found during that time frame was that a lot of the tools that are really like geared towards that, they're not like the chat focused ones like a chat GPT Teams. They are, helping you really generate the content. And what we're typically writing, the tools, it was really prescriptive. And so I could see how it would be helpful for someone who doesn't spend like all their days working writing, that doesn't really have a process nailed down for writing, and that also is not working on technical content. Because what we found was that the results of those tools, they really didn't seem to meet the needs of what our audience would be looking for. It was like too basic. So I would say that
Yeah.
that's something we learned over the years. And to Julia's point, we've started using more tools like ChatGPT Teams because it's that conversation. So it's constantly evolving. And that is, of course, one big thing that has changed is the launch, I don't know the exact date, but of ChatGPT Teams, because that makes it a tool that we can use when we're writing without having to worry about where that information is going. Because, of course, that was a huge concern when these tools first started being incorporated into our professional lives was, wait, this data is being used to train a large language model. What does that mean? Who's going to know this information? So, Chat GPT Teams, that's confidential. That's the paid version. That information's not going anywhere. So that's, of course, been a huge change that we've seen.
Yes, and makes us feel a lot more comfortable about using these tools, knowing our information will be confidential. Okay, so you mentioned ChatGPT Teams. So obviously you
Mhm.
guys are using that, and I just got on the team too with you. I previously been experimenting mostly in Claude, and so I like them both. So I'm excited about that. What other tools, or is that the only tool you're using, or what else are you using, and why did you choose?
Jamie's been using Claude a little bit too, and I think some other people on our team. Jamie, did you want to talk to that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So we've talked about writing, but one thing we've kind of just recently started experimenting on, and it's probably too recent to have like a good like conclusion, is that Claude has a tool or can be used, I guess, for content mapping. So some of the outputs are super interesting by putting in like a topic, it generates like a bunch of ideas for, pieces you might want to write under that topic. So again, back to the brainstorming aspect of content development, I think that's a really useful tool for that and something that Claude actually does do a little bit better than Chat GPT Teams, just in a side-by-side comparison.
I know that Claude at one point in time was a preferred place for larger data sets, and that's what attracted me to it. So I've used it for uploading raw research data and having it take a first pass at analysis and visual representation. What have you guys heard? Has that changed, I guess, the size of data set? Is it still went out, or now that you're on ChatGPT Teams, is it sort of an even playing field again?
I think the reason that we've kind of defaulted to Chat GPT Teams is like, I mean, of course, there's like the the built-in trust of ChatGPT, because it's like, I mean, it's like the Kleenex, the Band-Aid. It's the household name of AI chat tools. And then, like Jamie was explaining earlier, it's kind of a closed loop for us. So we're able to make sure that when we're using it, we're protecting our clients' data. Everything that we upload, all of our exchanges, it'll, in our own exchanges, it'll learn from what we give it, but that doesn't extend to other users. So the large language models aren't using our threads, our exchanges, our information, what we upload as learning information. I think that that's kind of why we've defaulted to ChatGPT Teams. But I think, Claude is another tool that we've been using a little bit. I personally, like on my own, have been experimenting with Gemini a little bit. We're getting ready to move soon, and I wanted an estimate on how much it would be to hire movers, but I didn't want to contact anyone. So I just kind of gave it some really key information, like how far we're moving, what our square footage is, of our current house and what we're going, our new house is going to be. And I just kind of asked it for a range, and it was helpful for that. But I mean, you really got to consider what information you're feeding it.
Fair enough. Any other tools before we move on? Because I have a lot of questions for you.
Yeah, one more comment on tools is Perplexity AI. Occasionally, that is a tool that is, it's interesting because it provides sources and it's set up to be more like a search site versus just like a chat bot. So it's I think they advertise themselves as AI-based search, which might not be unique, I don't know, but it is just helpful because there's sources right there. It's something I've noticed ChatGPT is actually starting to do more and more, is also provide a source or say, we pulled this information from these couple of sites. I don't know how it chooses those sites quite yet, but I think sourcing, especially when you're writing, technical content and longer form pieces, is really important.
I've done that too, where I've said, okay, tell me the sources where you got this
Yes.
information. And it gave me some real and some fake. And I realized, because it's an aggregation, it's not like this was the one source or the two sources. And so it sort of struggled. It's almost like you have to phrase things differently to get to, what Perplexity is programmed to do, I guess. Well, I know we talked a little bit about research when you're going into the writing process. Are there other ways in which research has changed or using it in a new way that maybe you haven't done in the past?
I think I'd like to say that one of the most interesting things about research is, in the past, and I would, of course, just go to Google. I'd Google it, right? I'd Google my question that I had. I think one thing that I've started doing more and more, especially this year, as Google's always changing the algorithm and trying to make changes that are going to provide, quality content. We've heard and talked a lot about, you've had a lot of guests that have very knowledgeably spoken to the EEAT and the changes in Google. And one thing that I think's been a side effect of that is that a lot of Google searches are prioritizing responses from discussion-based sites like Reddit and Quora and other discussion forums. And I think in some instances, maybe that's just fine. But a lot of times, at least for me personally, you don't know those people. And I think Google's considering their firsthand experience as, that experience in the EEAT. But for me, if I'm looking at a technical topic, I don't know if they're an authority on that topic, if this discussion forum site is coming up. So I've started doing most of my searches like that in ChatGPT as well, versus just automatically going to Google. Of course, there's cross-referencing when something comes up on ChatGPT to try to find the source of it. But I feel like that level of experience, while I understand what Google's going for, it doesn't seem to be the best fit in pulling information from some of those sites for the technical topics that we're writing on. It's not, maybe, in my opinion, as authoritative.
Julia, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what Jamie was saying. You got to really kind of I mean, all of a sudden we have to be cautious about the results that we're getting from Google, which is wild, being that, they are the search engine, and all of a sudden now we can't totally trust the search results. So using ChatGPT kind of as a cross-reference, I think, is helpful. Maybe ask your initial questions, do your initial research in ChatGPT Teams, and then try to cross-reference it with like very specific searches on Google.
Okay, good advice. And we just recently had a 2-part series on SEO and all the changes Google has made. So if you guys are tuning in and hearing this and going, what? Wait, what do you mean? Google's prioritizing, Reddit and Quora and stuff like that. Go listen to those episodes. So they're just a few episodes back. Good deal. Well, one of the things I'm really interested to hear you guys talk about are prompts, because, a year ago or so, prompt engineering was such a big buzzword. And how do you do a prompt, and how detailed do you need to be, and even having a prompt library for your company that people could pull from. So where are we today on the whole prompting thing?
So prompting was, we were calling it prompt engineering for a while. I haven't heard that term used in a minute, but that makes it sound bigger and scarier than I think it really is. I first dove into AI, when we as a company first started talking about AI, I was newly pregnant and I was like, I just don't have the capacity for this. So I buried my head in the sand and ignored it for a couple months. And then when I returned from my parental leave, I was like, okay, I'm behind on this, and jumped in head first. I started with a webinar that Morgan recorded, and she's got this really great kind of prompt structure for getting started, where you tell the AI tool, this is what your role is. So for example, I say, I give it my role at TREW. I tell it, you work for a marketing agency that works with technical companies and markets to technical audiences. Then you give it some background info, and then you tell it what you want it to do. And that, I think, has really evolved for me in that first prompt, I try to organize all of my prompting by client. So I have like a single thread for all of the exchanges that I have with a single client. And I give it a ton of detail and background information in the beginning. So I'll give it information about their audience, their personas. I will give it information about their voice, their tone, how they do their writing. Sometimes I'll give it info like, here's their about statement, here's kind of their pitch. I'll give it all sorts of information like that. And a lot of times what I'll do is, in that first prompt, I will give it all that information, that background information, and then I'll ask it, do you have any questions? Mm-hmm. And that can be, I'm always pleasantly surprised when it comes back with questions that like we ask our clients in our strategy sessions. And I'm always like, good for you, ChatGPT Teams. And, but just adding detail as much as you can. Oh, another thing I do is, in organizing it as a single thread, a lot of times when I'm kind of coming back and saying, okay, today we're going to work on blah, blah, blah. And at the very end of whatever my new prompt is, I'll say, refer to previous exchanges in this thread for more background information. And that's something that's kind of new to the tool. I think maybe 4 or 5 months ago, they started where it could refer back to previous exchanges from weeks ago, months ago, that are in the same thread. I also am not necessarily of the camp where I feel like AI is going to become sentient and take over the world, but I do, just in case, I say hello, I use thank you.
You're polite.
Yeah, I'm polite. I give it feedback too. Like if it gives me a response that I really like, I'll just kind of like highlight it and send it back to it and say, I like this response. And a lot of times I like most of it, so I'm kind of iterating on it. Yeah, I talk to it like it's a person. like it's an intern or an assistant or something like that.
Jamie, are you following a similar process to prompting?
Julia and I have done some prompting, some things together, and she's an incredibly organized system, and I love it. And I aspire to be like that. I use a lot of the tips that she's already talked about. I think just to add one more thing, kind of an example, something I really like to use AI for, because it really does this as a kind of time-saving tool, is if I'm comparing two things. Like recently I was writing a blog post and I needed to compare using a supercapacitor versus a battery in some robotic tools for a manufacturer. And it was really helpful. Like, I gave it some background information, but really I just wanted a general comparison. And it made like a nice chart comparing the pros and cons of each. And
Mhm.
that's probably one of my favorite use cases of ChatGPT Teams and AI in general, is instead of looking for, you're going to get articles on supercapacitors, articles on using batteries, and then kind of drawing that comparison. It's pulling multiple articles together, drawing that comparison for you. You can of course check things as needed with it, but that's just like one of my favorite use cases and prompts, is to draw those comparisons.
Okay, Julia, I'm going to circle back to that you can refer to a previous, it's on the same thread, but a previous conversation. And I just want to make sure I have the nomenclature right. So how do you define a thread? Is a thread to you a client or a particular, I don't know, let's say white paper that you're writing for that client? What is a thread to you?
So I do one thread per client
Okay.
because I find a lot of times, especially if we're doing multiple content pieces for a particular client, sometimes I'll be working on something else like in the middle, and sometimes they're related. Sometimes I'll be creating iterative content.
Mhm.
For example, like if we're writing a white paper, we might be later writing a blog post that kind of summarizes that white paper. So it is kind of nice. And then I also don't have to do all of that background setup every
Yeah.
single time I'm opening a new
Sure. No, that makes
piece.
sense. Well, let's talk about, okay, we've talked about all the great things that you guys have figured out. What are some challenging things that you've encountered and what have you done about it?
Yeah, I can speak to one. In the early AI days, we learned that counterintuitively, uh, AI is not good at searching the internet, meaning that it learns from the internet, but it learns from the internet like before a certain date. So if you're looking for accurate information that's on a website today, there's a good chance that the AI tool will hallucinate. And what that means is basically it just kind of like, I don't know, gets confused. And so if you tell it to search a particular website, it might give you some information that's logical, but not accurate. So it has learned from that site in the past, so it can kind of come up with a logical response. But I've seen it straight up make up information that I'm like, that doesn't exist. Like, that's not on there. And to my
Yeah.
knowledge, that hasn't
Hmm.
been solved yet. So what I've used as a workaround is I will either take a web page that I want it to analyze, and I will either print it to PDF, so I have a PDF file of the web page, or like take a full page screenshot, and then I upload that and tell it to analyze that.
Isn't
So
that insane? It's so inefficient. Rather than just go look at this URL and then
yeah,
tell me XYZ. This is
yeah,
amazing to me that these tools can't do
it's
that.
counterintuitive.
Yeah,
And
it's a
I
good one.
recently had
Jamie, how about you?
ChatGPT Teams tell me, like, I tried to do that with a URL and it was like, I don't analyze websites. Like, that was its response.
Jamie, have you hit any other challenges that it mainly is it same thing, kind of like the made up information and things being a little dated?
Yeah, exactly. And it goes back to the like trust but verify that we've been talking about. So I think that's the kind of one of the overall biggest challenges with, bringing AI tools into your daily life, is just that, like, it's great. There are efficiencies, but always cross-check, trust but verify. So to avoid those
Yeah.
types of issues.
Well, to help those listening and watching just wrap their heads around what this looks like in action, could you guys share an example of a project where AI was just clutch to you, whether it saved you time or it made the end product better? Any of those would be fine.
Well, I have a really fun one because Jamie and I used ChatGPT Teams to prepare for this podcast episode.
Oh,
So I've done some previous work on content marketing engineered with, editing episodes, kind of helping to create promo materials, helping to come up with topics. And so I already had a content marketing engineered thread. And when you reached out to us to see if we wanted to be on the episode, we kind of had a kind of an email exchange about different topics we wanted to cover. And so what I did is I created a new prompt and I said, you and a coworker are preparing to be a guest on the Content Marketing Engineer podcast. And then I had, like a little reference, see previous exchanges for background info on the podcast. And your episode is going to talk about how the TREW team uses AI tools, especially within the writing process. And then I printed our email exchange where we were talking about topics to PDF. I attached it to my ChatGPT prompt, and then I said, please help me come up with at least 25 topics for us to discuss. And then Jamie and I added it to a Google Doc, and we edited the heck out of it and just kind of came up with different topics we wanted to talk about. We started talking about answers. I'd say we probably used maybe 50% of the topics, or like some of the questions we were like, we kind of already answered it here. And so I mean, this podcast episode
had a big AI assist. I love it. What
Yes,
a great example. And let
It
me
did.
ask you, do you feel
Mhm.
that by using AI like you did it save you time? Did it enhance how you approach the episode? A little both? What would you say?
I think so.
I'd say a
Jamie,
little
what
of
do you
both.
think?
Yeah. Yeah, a little of both, because when you you have a lot to say on a topic, but you really need help kind of formalizing all of those thoughts. And I think it was a good prompting
Organizing.
exercise. Yeah, got us organized, and it got us just talking to each other about what we are doing day in and day out. So that was really helpful. It was like a discussion starter for us too when we did that exercise. We were going through and combining topics and talking about what we're doing.
I think it was also a good reminder too that a lot of times what the AI will give you, like on first pass, you're like, this is perfect. I don't need to make any changes. Like, I love all of these questions, but ultimately you still need to use your human brain to like read it and edit it. And Jamie and I both use AI tools a lot throughout our writing process. We are not submitting an AI written piece to a client. AI has touched it, but it's not AI generated content. We take pieces from that process. Like I said, in preparing for this episode, Jamie and I used maybe 50% of the topics that it came up with. And then from there, we probably added, 30% more that just came out of our heads. I emphasize to people over and over and over again, it's a tool. It's not going to replace another person.
Oh man, you're taking my big questions away from me.
Well, I can talk more about that.
Yes. Well, and also, and I asked the question because people may think that, you can, as a writer, produce twice as much content because of AI. And no. It's not that kind of time saving. So to me, if anything, it's creating a better quality piece. It's making you think more deeply or think on different vectors that you hadn't considered. And there is some time saving, but it's not so significant that we're going to, completely change our model here. How do you balance using AI and just being creative and thinking differently?
That's funny. That goes so well with what we were just talking about, because that was what I was going to say. I think it was you at our industrial marketing summit earlier this year that said that having an AI tool is it's your assistant. And I think that that is one of the things that I really like. It's like if I had an assistant sitting next to me all day that I could just bounce ideas off of and kind of just ask random questions, and then they'd give me their answer because they're, knowledgeable on all topics, but, also wouldn't be offended when I then took that answer and I was just tweaking everything constantly. Like that's kind of how I personally am treating AI day in and day out. So, like, for example, I might have written a piece and wrote the headline, but I might say, and I might not provide a ton of context because I actually want like the uncontextualized answer of like, hey, ChatGPT Teams, give me 10 more ideas, iterations really of this headline. And I rarely get like something I want to just use verbatim, but I might find a word or two that I wasn't thinking of. And it's
Yeah,
to your
so
point,
inspiration.
yeah, and where you just said, maybe, like slightly better content. So to your point, it's just kind of like being able to really iterate a little more, have a little more inspiration than you would if you weren't having that AI assist.
Fair enough. I remember, I think Morgan called it the brainstorm buddy at one point in time, and that stuck with
That's a
me
good
too.
one.
That's
Your
that's great
intern, your
too. It
brainstorm
really
buddy.
is. Yeah.
Good, good.
Yeah.
Well, can you share some tips for other marketers that are looking to integrate AI into their processes, whether that be writing or marketing in general?
Yeah, I think start small, you know, try to come up with specific use cases. Like, so think about things in your job, in your writing process that are kind of tedious or repetitive. And think about going back to treating it like a person, like an assistant. Think about how if you were going to delegate this to another person, and obviously, you don't have another person, but you do have, an AI tool. Think about how you would explain it to someone you're delegating it to, and try delegating it to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever AI tool you're using. Also, like I said, try to come up with like personal use cases for it too. I think a lot of the learning, I think it's like almost any software tool, is you really learn the best by just kind of playing with it. And the
Yeah,
more
me
you play
too.
with it, the more you force yourself to use it, the more you'll learn about it. And then just keep refining. Like, give it a prompt and you don't like what it gives back to you, try rewriting your prompt. Try adding more detail to it. Or tell it like, I didn't like this version of this. Like, give it feedback. Yeah, I think that's a good way to get started.
Yeah, I like that. Jamie,
And to
anything
add
else to
to
add?
that, yeah, I think just like Julie said, embrace it as a tool to guide you through your process. I think especially when, AI was first coming out as a tool, there was a lot of fear and there was a lot of just kind of like hesitancy to use it, and also a lot of frustration because I think people went into the tool and were like, write this for me, and they like were not at all excited about the results. And so
Mm,
I think to recap some of the things Julia talked about, it's like, giving it enough information so that it's going to provide, higher quality results. So embracing it, developing that
Yeah.
process, and to Julia's point, keep iterating on it because things are always changing.
Yeah.
okay. And then, there's still people out there that are hesitating. They're nervous about it. They haven't started. What advice do you give to those folks?
It's going to feel like more work at first. Think about, in that example, like if you're delegating it to someone, okay, the first time you explain it to someone, you have to think through all of the different steps and details in your head. And then once you figure it out, once you've done it a couple more times, you can start to draw from things that you've already done. I have not had to use this in a while, but before we were using ChatGPT Teams, what I was doing is, when I was using Claude or any of the other free tools, in order to protect client data and everything, I would anonymize everything. So I would have the same prompt, But instead of saying the client name, I would go client and put it in brackets and product and put it in brackets. And like that was super tedious. That was before I kind of had developed my system where I organize everything in a single thread. I think that was honestly before we knew that it could learn from itself, or like that was kind of a newer feature that it can learn from previous exchanges. So I had actually created a whole document where I like set up a prompt library, and I was like, this is my starting prompt for this client. This is my starting prompt for this client. So, just kind of creating a note for yourself where you write down what works and what doesn't. I think that can be helpful too. And, just don't be afraid of it. I mean, like we keep saying, trust but verify, make sure you edit it, make sure you read it. And then just run with it.
Should marketers be concerned that AI is taking their job away?
I don't foresee it mastering like the nuances of like human content, especially for, technical audiences. I just think it's like another type of software tool that helps with efficiency gains and helps with, maybe more ideation, but no, I don't think that is a concern.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not concerned anytime soon. I think it's also not going to master the strategy of marketing, especially in a niche like ours, like hyper specific and technical, and we're technical B2B. We market to engineers and manufacturers, and that's unique even within B2B. You know what I mean? Like what's going to work in SaaS is not going to work for audiences.
You can't just aggregate a strategy across all of that and expect it to work.
Right. And you also have to think about as all these tools are learning, as the large language models are kind of pulling in information. I mean, I suppose they can, pull information from anywhere, but, think about how they're going to focus, what the software engineers are teaching the AIs. They're going to focus on the use cases that are more common. They're going to focus on like the bigger picture. And so, I imagine that mastering the nuances of technical audiences is probably a little bit lower on their priority list. So I think that I think we're safe for now.
Yeah. Well, we'll continue to revisit this. Obviously, this won't be the last time. Good. Well, thank you both. I really enjoyed just catching up. We hadn't had this conversation internally in a while, so this was fun to have you on. And thank you. Have a great day. Thanks for joining me today on Content Marketing Engineered. For show notes, including links to resources, visit TREWmarketing.com/podcast. While there, you can subscribe to our blog and our newsletter and order a copy of my book, Content Marketing Engineered. Also, I would love your reviews on this podcast. So please, when you get a chance, subscribe and leave me your review on your favorite podcast subscription platform. Thanks and have a great day.